Hello there, welcome to the Europe Report on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson with your daily update on the European elections every weekday in the lead up to this weekend's vote. Well, first then, it is the issue of the European election in the United Kingdom, and Brexit is back in the headlines thanks to some big announcements from Theresa May Tuesday evening. The British Prime Minister setting out 10 points of what she called a new plan for Brexit and promising to let MPs vote on the possibility of a new referendum to confirm that deal, if, that is, they first support her bill in Parliament. Well, Mrs May's plan includes new promises on workers' rights and environmental standards, as well as making sure that the so-called backstop on the UK-Ireland border never comes into force.
I've also listened carefully to those who've been arguing for a second referendum. I've made my own view on this clear on many times. I do not believe this is a route that we should take, because I think we should be implementing the result of the first referendum, not asking the British people to vote in a second one. But I recognise the genuine and sincere strength of feeling across the House on this important issue. The government will therefore include in the withdrawal agreement bill, at introduction, a requirement to vote on whether to hold a second referendum. And this must take place before the withdrawal agreement can be ratified.
Well, next, the political turmoil continues in Austria. All ministers but one from the far-right Freedom Party have quit the government, and the Chancellor is to face a no-confidence vote on Monday, one day, of course, after the European election. Chancellor Sebastian Kurz has been struggling to handle the fallout from a scandal that toppled his coalition with the far-right Freedom Party, or FPO. Well, on Saturday, the Austrian Vice-Chancellor and Freedom Party leader resigned, this after he was filmed in an apparent sting operation offering to fix state contracts for a woman posing as a Russian oligarch's niece. The new election is expected in September. Meanwhile, technocrats will fill vacant government posts. Here in Paris, the Portuguese Prime Minister has been lining up with President Macron in calling for voters to cast their ballot against nationalism. Antonio Costa leads Portugal's Socialist Party, while Emmanuel Macron positions himself as neither left nor right-wing. However, Mr Costa talked up their political similarities. Take a listen.
This week, we must launch a call to all citizens to participate in these elections. These are decisive elections. We must build a great coalition of Democrats and progressives against those who would destroy Europe with nationalism and threaten freedom.
Well, meanwhile, Donald Trump's former advisor, Steve Bannon, has drawn criticism from the French Prime Minister for openly working to influence the outcome of the European election in favour of Eurosceptics, nationalists and populists. Mr Bannon has described the election as a referendum on President Macron, and he predicts a, quote, earthquake come Sunday. Here's Prime Minister Edouard Philippe's comment on the American former investment banker turned political strategist.
This Mr Bannon, who has advised President Trump, as is his right, when I read his statements, he seems to be coming to Europe, coming to France, to say how deep an interest there is for him and for President Trump in us changing what makes Europe what it is, in us changing the values that allowed us to build Europe.
Well, staying in France just a little longer, here's a flashy claim for you that 40% of French people want to quit the European Union in a so-called Brexit. Well, it makes a decent headline, but is it true? Here on the Europe Report, we thought the claim was worth us digging into. So here's Roxane Runel with Fact or Fake.
Do 40% of French people want a Frexit? That's a recent claim tweeted by Florian Philippot, the founder and leader of a new and pro-Frexit party called the Patriots. He cites a poll carried out by the IFOP agency for a French magazine in February. However, the 40% mentioned in the survey do not correspond to Mr. Philippot's claim. In fact, the survey was about French people's attitudes towards citizens' referendums. The questions and the results are more complex than Mr. Philippot suggests. The people questioned were in fact asked whether they would take part in a hypothetical vote on, quote, France's exit from the European Union. 57% answered yes, they would take part in this. Of those 57%, 40% declared they would vote in favour of France quitting the European Union. As you can see, this is much more complex than what Florian Philippot made out. In reality, the proportion of French voters of all political colours who are favourable to leaving the EU is estimated at 23%. That figure can be found in another IFOP survey from early May 2019. Currently, the clearly pro-Frexit parties that are standing in France are attracting less than 10% of voters for the European election.
Well, let's move on now with the next in our reporting series, Europe Behind the Scenes. Now, one huge job taken on by some members of the European Parliament is investigating major financial crimes. One committee in particular has been investigating what could actually be the biggest money laundering scandal of all time, this at Denmark's Danske Bank. Our correspondent Alix Le Bourdon went along with them on a fact-finding trip to Copenhagen.
Destination Copenhagen, but not for a city break. This team of MEPs is headed to the Danish capital with weightier matters in mind. They're part of the Tax 3 Special Committee, here to find out more about the Danske Bank scandal. Danske Bank is accused of laundering 200 billion euros through its Estonian subsidiary from 2007 to 2015. Allegedly dirty money coming from Russia and the former USSR. But for the committee, the issue goes far beyond the countries involved.
It's not a problem just for Estonia or Denmark, or for Denmark and Estonia. It's a real problem for all Europe.
The first stop for the team, the Danish prosecutor in charge of the case.
We are eager to hear what you can tell us.
Our team is only authorised to film the start of proceedings. After the interview, the MEPs say they're disappointed by the Danish prosecutor's answers.
The prosecutor wasn't willing to give us the whole story. He sees the law as the most important thing, so he didn't want to make a mistake.
Money laundering is indeed a touchy question in Denmark, damaging the nation's reputation for low corruption. The MEPs also meet with NGOs who highlight the economic damage caused by financial crimes.
The challenge is that on tax issues, countries have national sovereignty, and there you see that the tax haven countries within Europe, they are blocking a lot of the progress that we could see.
Another controversial issue is the so-called revolving door between high-level public servants and the private sector.
How often do we find people who are in government and then are serving in these banking institutions?
But Ana Gomez did not expect to see that point illustrated so swiftly. Here she recognises the director of Denmark's banking sector as the same man who used to be in charge of the country's financial regulations agency.
The worst is that he was the regulator at the time when all the alarms were raised. It's serious, it's criminal.
The response from the former watchdog turned bank chief?
I have no comments on that.
After 3 terms as an MEP, Ana Gomez is stepping down at the next election. Back in Brussels, she remains frustrated at the lack of progress fighting financial crime.
Member states have to do their job. No government can claim to protect us from terrorism or organized crime, for example, if they leave this in the hands of people from the financial world who have no interest in how the law is applied.
But the EU's investigation is at an impasse. Despite opposition from EU member states, the European Banking Authority closed the investigation, blocking any further legal action against the Estonian and Danish financial watchdogs.
Well, let's check in now with the France 24 Europe tour. Our team has made it to Germany. They do say that Brussels is the capital of Europe, don't they? But for young Europeans, it seems that Berlin is now rather the place to be. The German capital, one of the most popular destinations for students on the Erasmus exchange programmes. Well, a new study just out from the European Commission has found that 7 out of 10 Erasmus students said that taking part helped them to get their first job. Our reporters have been to search out the secret recipe that makes Berlin a top choice for adventure-seeking students and trainees.
Some call them the Erasmus generation. Young Europeans exchanging cultures and life skills.
So Erasmus changed life.
At first you're like, wow, why are we doing this to ourselves?
It's amazing because it's not just for people who go to university and do long studies.
Stars like Lady Gaga and Eva Longoria have dresses made in this Berlin workshop. Thanks to Erasmus+, Juliette's couture apprenticeship in Paris led to a 2-month internship in Germany.
What's interesting is that each dress is unique. There's not one model we make twice, so our work is truly diverse.
20-year-old Juliette is living abroad for the first time. She doesn't speak German and only a little English, but she's enjoying this opportunity to discover new cultures. The young French designer could see herself staying here a little longer.
When you're a young designer, you tend not to have that much money. Berlin is a good option because life isn't too expensive.
Matteo is also on the student exchange program Erasmus, but he's taking a German literature course. He shares a flat with Spanish, Italians and Scots, a melting pot of young Europeans exercising their freedom of movement. Matteo speaks fluent German and has a favorite word, Heimat, which means home.
My Heimat was Italy, but now I think my Heimat is Germany. And that's really strange for me because I wouldn't have imagined that before.
Yep.
His flatmate Emily came to Berlin as part of her law degree. She's glad she moved away from Scotland before Brexit comes into effect, with uncertainty over what it will mean for the Erasmus scheme.
And they keep saying that they're working to make separate agreements with all their partner universities, but I can't imagine that it's going to be easy next year.
Berlin is one of the favourite destinations for young Europeans on Erasmus, with many attracted to its vibrant cultural scene. Architecture students also find inspiration in the city's unique history.
When you study architecture, it's interesting because you truly see the difference in East and West Berlin. It helps you to truly understand the divide there was in the city at one point in its history.
Erasmus provides an allowance to live abroad, but it's often not enough to cover all costs.
You get the chance to go quite easily to another country, learn lots of things, so we're really lucky, and besides, you're given money to go.
It all depends on your finances. In my case, I had to get a loan, but without that, people like me couldn't manage.
Erasmus is one of Europe's most popular programs and a real success in the eyes of participants. Politicians too tend to agree, and the European Parliament wants to triple the program's €14 billion budget.
That's it for Berlin. Next we head to Denmark, where the small town of Sonderborg is particularly worried by climate change. It's almost completely surrounded by water and often subjected to floodings. The town is trying to be as eco-friendly as possible with zero carbon commitments. You'll see all of that in our next report on the France 24 Europe tour.
We certainly will. Well, just before we leave you, if you think all political candidates are kind of the same, well, here's a lady for you who is bucking the trend for sure. There she is. Her name is Liesel Heiser. She's 100 years old. And on Sunday, she's standing not in the European elections, but as a local councillor in her small southwest German hometown of Kirchheim-Bolanden. The focus of her campaign isn't immigration, security, or the economy. Rather, her key policy is reopening the local outdoor swimming pool. Well, that's it from me and the team for this edition of the Europe Report. We are on air every day at 2:45 and 6:30 p.m. Paris time. And remember, we'll also have a live special for you on Sunday night from 9 p.m. onwards, Paris time, as all the election results come in. For now, though, the international news continues here on France 24.